Hello and welcome back to GBN America with me, Patrick Christys. And right here in the UK, we have our own problems going on with cover-ups and the deep state, as Elon Musk keeps pointing out in relation to our Prime Minister and the Labour Party, and grooming gangs. But over in the US, well, there's their own version of the deep state, apparently. And Trump has vowed to smash it. So I want to know, what is the deep state? And what exactly is it responsible for? So joining me today, we've got Taryn Rosenkranz, a Democratic strategist and founder and CEO of New Blue Interactive, and GOP strategist and founder of FreePressFail.com, Corinne Clark. Both of you, thank you very much. Great to have you both on the show. Corinne, I'll start with you if that's okay. What is the deep state as far as you're concerned?
I think the deep state is a combination of an overinflated federal government, the executive branch specifically, and the expansion into government contractors, a lot of unelected people who make very important decisions with very little oversight. And we're seeing that a lot in our intelligence community and our defense agencies, because they can classify things, they keep that from Congress, and they kind of pursue their own agenda without a lot of oversight. And I think the Department of Justice in particular has made clear what an issue this is, going after political opponents like Donald Trump. And I think he's brought a lot of light to the issue. And now we're hopefully going to be doing something about it.
Okay, all right. Well, Taryn, I'll ask you for a similar question, really. I mean, do you think that there is a problem when it comes to the deep state?
I think that there are things that we need to expose within our own government. It's interesting that she said how the Department of Justice has brought many of this to light, and it's true. Unfortunately, much of it that was brought to light was things that Donald Trump had done. So I do think it's an important, and it is an important thing that we do as a government, is to make sure that we are doing the right things and that there are proper oversight. We want to make sure that we do have somebody that is looking into things. Our country certainly has had its fair share. If we go back to Richard Nixon and some of the things that were going on, we've had our fair share of scandals. We've had our fair share of bloated government or needing oversight, and making sure that we are doing the right things. So it isn't something that we should be ignoring. But I do think that the approach that we're about to take in 2025 may not be the right one. And I certainly think having two billionaires
Just sticking with you there, Taryn. Yeah, just sticking with you on that then. So what do you think this approach is going to be?
What his current approach is going to be. Well, I do think having these two billionaires, it's always interesting to me when you say, let's, make better government and make them more efficient, but let's go ahead and create a new department to do so. Doesn't always seem like it's the right approach. But we've got these two billionaires coming in who I think are going to come in and try as best they can to dismantle a lot of regulations that are protecting everyday Americans like you and I, but not like you, but like my family, which we want to make sure that we have folks that are, out there and doing things that are going to be good for the rest of us. Okay. That is what we want to have happen. That is what government agencies and these bureaucrats who are out there doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is making sure that we are kept safe. That's why we have things like the Consumer Product Safety Administration, right? These are things that we want them to be doing. And when we don't have these proper regulations that are protecting them, then we're throwing them away so that Elon Musk can make more cars without anything that he needs to be able to do.
Let's pick up on that with Corinne. Let's pick up on that with Corinne, because from an outsider's perspective, I think it did look a little bit to me at times like maybe Joe Biden was being propped up by something that I suppose you might be able to call the deep state, that maybe we weren't being told the full facts about his cognitive decline. And also, just to pick up again on something that Taryn was saying there, which is, it's all well and good having these government departments, isn't it? But if they're costing us all a huge amount of money, or American taxpayers a huge amount of money, and we don't always know exactly what they do, is that something that maybe the Argentina approach needs to be taken, Corinne, do you think?
I think that's worth exploring for sure. And, this isn't really the creation of a government efficiency department. It's not really a department. It's more of an advisory role, which is exactly what we need, is somebody who's not invested in growing the size of government because they're not actually a part of the government, coming in there and saying, maybe these are things that we should cut. I don't think anyone's going after consumer protections immediately. I think the agenda is pretty clear, which is to cut the budget and to cut the the number of federal employees that we may not need. And I think those can be addressed individually. And having an advisory department is perfect for that, to address those individually. So we don't have to make these blanket cuts and just say, all of this is gone. We can actually assess that on an individual level. What is this department doing? Are they benefiting the American people? And if they are not, they do not need to be there and they do not need to be funded. That's absolutely how it should have been done this entire time. And I think Congress has really lost that oversight. They've given a lot of their regulatory power to executive boards. And now we just need to have some of that power shifted back to Congress, to the people, to really regulate these agencies so they don't just act however they want. We want to make sure that they're acting in the interest of the people.
Well, and on that, Taryn, it strikes me that at times in America there have been numerous cover-ups. I mean, especially when it comes to things like the FBI or the CIA. Mm-hmm. Now, I think anyone of any country will acknowledge that there are times in life where the ordinary members of the public probably shouldn't know absolutely everything for a variety of different reasons. And I think most people get that. But I do wonder when it comes to the FBI in America. I mean, I know Kash Patel has been very, very clear that he's going to get more things disclosed to people, which perpetuates the idea that potentially our intelligence services, instead of just keeping us safe, have been overreaching quite significantly and keeping things from, in your case, the US population. Would you agree with that, Taryn, or not?
I think we need to know that there's a distinct line in what we need to know and be transparent about and make sure that we're on top of, and what should be a security, for the matters of national security that we might not need to know, so that we might need to make sure that we understand that keeping us safe does have some level of national security. I do think one thing that is something that we need to explore more, that Democrats and Republicans both seem to agree on, and to some degree has been the role of the government contractor, and what has really grown outside of the government and become something that has been a huge problem. And actually, if you look at this latest thing, New Orleans, the gentleman was working as a contractor outside in the government sector. And this is something we need to make sure when we're talking about this, these huge government contracts that are awarded, what's happening here, that's a large portion of where some of these things are going, and that is private industry. And this is exactly what we've brought in, private outside industry and big corporations to be able to make these decisions. And that's where we get things where national security, transparency, what are we doing? Are we putting profit before the safety of our folks and our actual people at home? And that's where I want to make sure that we're making the right kinds of decisions. And that's where these things are a problem. And they've been a problem for several decades, because we brought in and decided that we wanted to rely on contractors instead of government. And I think that that's where we start to see some of these problems arise.
I just wonder, Corinne, if this actually cuts right to the very core of democracy. So if we look at what's been going on, New Jersey, for example, with the drones situation there, and with other potential technologies that certain companies that are non-governmental may well be in possession of. I mean, there's some of the big ones, aren't there, like Lockheed Martin and people like that, who for a long time have been rumoured to have potentially been in possession of a variety of different things. Shouldn't the taxpayer and Americans know about that? Shouldn't the taxpayer and Americans, be informed about that? So, because otherwise it gives those companies a huge amount of power and leverage over the state.
Yeah, I think that there is a lot we could do to increase transparency. But the thing about government contractors is that it is the most transparent process if we're comparing it to agency, because at least our government contractors have an open bidding process. They do have to prove their competency and their worth and their value to these agencies. And they do that periodically to re-up their contracts with the government. That's something a federal agency hasn't had to do. They haven't had to prove their worth at all, which they've just continued to grow. And their service is not really calculatable. A lot of people are not feeling the benefit of these agencies. But I agree there's a lot to cut down with federal employees and with contractors. And if you're asking if we can make cuts, yeah, why not both? It doesn't have to be either or. We can really assess this on an individual level. We can address the issues with contractors and the overgrowth of federal employees.
Yeah, Corinne, I'll just stick with you on this, because it's going to be quite tricky for Trump and whoever's in charge of this, whether it's Musk or Ramaswamy, to come in and do it, because it's going to be unpopular, because there are with the people involved, right? Because there is this huge industry, as we've been talking about, of state employees, federal employees, is massive industry, huge. And so in order to tell a load of people that essentially their job isn't worthwhile and that they don't do a lot for their money and they need to go and find themselves some other employment, potentially in the private sector, that's going to take some serious guts. I mean, do you think they've got that, Karine?
I think they do have the guts. And what is interesting about Trump having this second term, but, separated, it's a new kind of thing. He is not going to run for office again. He is not going to pursue a career in politics after this presidency. I think that gives him a little more strength to make some of those hard decisions that might not be as popular in the moment. But when we think about this, like, we have 2 million federal employees. That's more employees than Walmart Corporation has. And then we add the fact that we have 7 million people employed through federal contracts. That's insane. And anybody who has a normal job is wondering why our federal government is paying all of these other people. Why are they not working for the economy? Why are they not working in private industry? And I think that's something that needs to be addressed. The government should not be the biggest corporation in the world. And right now, they really are. So that's something that's going to be difficult to cut down, but it is something I think most Americans outside of the Beltway that don't work for those do not work for those agencies or those contractors, they do think it's very necessary.
I suppose as well, I mean, both of you would know much more about this than I would, but Taryn, whether or not there's a perceived bias amongst that industry as well. So, for example, here in Britain, when we look at our civil service, there is quite a lot of evidence to point towards a very strong left-wing bias there. If that's the same in America, if there's a Democrat bias amongst, you're obviously shaking your head, you don't think that's true, but if there is,
I don't think necessarily.
Yeah.
I don't think that necessarily it is seen that way. I do think one of the biggest problems they're going to face, regardless, is going to be that all we have talked about was how poor the economy was doing and how jobs have been so important. And losing this amount of jobs, no matter how you slice or dice it, and putting those jobs into the marketplace, job seekers into the marketplace when people are worried about jobs in the economy is going to be devastating. And I hope it's not. For all of the world, I want to make sure that America is as strong as it can possibly be. But I worry so much for everyone if we're going to lose that many jobs. If you're going to slice and dice so that, we are getting rid of all of these jobs because they think that that's bloat and oversight and all these things, and to realize the impact that's going to have on everyday Americans and how many people are going to lose their jobs, both in the public sector and in the private sector.
I suppose it depends if they can justify their job. I mean, there was quite a comical moment, if you can call it that, when Syria fell to this particular regime that they've got at the moment, where apparently the man in charge of that regime found out that there was a minister for flags, and that whenever foreign dignitaries had to come to Syria, which by the way was like never, that their job was to
I'm sure you can compare Syria to America.
Lay the flags up. But my point is this, which is that when you actually get into the nitty gritty of it and you ask people in the public sector, what is your actual job? What do you actually do for your money? Then maybe that unearths the fact that there are quite a few people, Taryn, who don't do a lot for their money. And why should the taxpayer be paying for that?
Yeah. And I don't think anyone objects to something that is, outrageous or, but the talking that we have done at this level of how many jobs we want to get rid of and what we want to do and how we want to dismantle the Department of Education or what we want to do. I mean, we really need to be focusing on educational reform. It is something that is so important to so many people. And the kinds of ideas that have been put forward so far, if this was truly about helping children and making sure that we were giving them the proper education system, then I would 100% every minute of every day want to work towards that. And I want to make sure that's what we're doing. And I want to make sure that we're not putting billionaires' needs first. And that's been every, I think, mission that we've been working for is I want to make sure that everyday Americans are being helped and that we as a country are putting the needs first of not billionaires, not Elon Musk. Okay. That is not what's important to me. And so, if there's a ministry of flags, which I can sincerely say I do not think there is. If that's what's happening, then let's do the oversight and let's make a person's job to do the oversight, not a billionaire.
I suppose the flip side of that, Connie, though, would be that a billionaire is a wealth creator and a wealth generator who has maybe built numerous businesses and knows about streamlining and efficiency, and maybe they are the kind of person, Connie, to come and be in a position of power.
That is the thinking, I think, of this advisory department of the Department of Government Efficiency, that there are people in business who have that eye, who can say, why do we have 4 middle managers? We probably don't need 4 people who just tell other people what to do. You can probably condense that to 1 person. That is going to be something that probably happens a million times throughout the government. And I work in DC. I've lived in DC for 15 years. I am very aware of how many middle managers could probably stand to seek a different career and not a taxpayer-funded career. And that is something that actually helps all of the people. And we can free up these resources to do better things. There are things that our federal government is invested in that they really do not need to be spending money on. And I know we can talk even about education reform.
Yeah. Go on, give us some examples.
Education reform, they talk about cutting the Department of Education, and that scares a lot of leftists who have big federal contracts with the Department of Education. But real education reform is done on the county level, and we see that happening in our states, and a lot of states who are making ground moving in a better direction for their counties. And that is what happens when you focus resources in the right place. When you put a bunch of resources at the top, it has a really hard time flowing all the way to the bottom. And that's where we see people in cities struggle, because they're not actually getting the resources that we're dumping into this federal department. If you really want to help people, you don't put money in the biggest bucket, you start putting it in the smaller ones. And that is something we've just been redistributing wealth, especially in education, for the last 50 years, and it hasn't really gotten us anywhere. Our education system is struggling more than before the Department of Education was created.
Just one last one, Taryn. I mean, I looked with some interest about George Soros being given that presidential medal earlier on, and I did wonder if that is maybe the ultimate symbol of there being a deep state. I mean, we here in Europe have had our own experiences of George Soros, influencing policy, donating a lot to various different political parties, obviously doing it in America as well. Is that not a symbol, do you think, of the deep state? Someone who ordinary people can't vote for, who have no way of contacting, by the way, but who clearly has a huge amount of influence, so much so that in the final days of the Biden presidency, he's being given the top honour.
Yeah, and I do think that they were honored for their philanthropic work. I'm going to back up for 1 second to prove something about the billionaire point, which is just that they have to answer to their stock payers, which is a very different thing than answering to the American people. Answering to stock, let's all be honest, in order to be a billionaire for a public and answering to stock and answering to the stock market and playing to it. So getting rid of middle managers and laying people off many times is to trick the stock price. Like, there's very different answers about what you do about efficiencies and why you do things that has nothing to do with the success really as it does with the stock price. So many times the decisions that you make, sometimes we see it many times where they have increased earnings in one quarter only to turn around and see the impact that it actually has on their product the next quarter. So they are laying people off and then hiring people back. It is a trick of a corporation over and over and over again to play with the numbers. They hire people up that they don't need. These are things that happen, and then they fire them the next, all so that they can make it seem to the stock price that they have increases and decreases. So it does not make it efficient, and it certainly does not make for good government. It means they're really good at playing with the minds of the person putting money into the stock market. So I do want to make sure that we're not confusing the ability to run a good business and make sure that you are playing with the minds of the American people. That just means they're good at playing with the minds of the American voters. We want real good efficiencies. And putting things like education in the counties, what happens to that, to your point about redistribution? Yes, then Mississippi is still the 50th worst state for education. We want to help those people. I am trying to make sure that we do have a federal government who can have oversight so that a county in Mississippi who is not getting the resources they need gets the same education as someone in a state that has more wealth. And that's because these counties are not able to have the same kinds of resources. They should be getting the same kind of
education before the Department of Education was created.
Correct. So let's do better. If you want to do better, Mr. Trump,
45 years,
let's do better. Let's not dismantle it. Then he should want to help those children in Mississippi if he wants to do better, not dismantle it. Because that county in Mississippi.
Let's let Corinne come back to that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that the goal is to help people, not just children, but obviously children as well. And the point is, the Department of Education has existed for how many decades? And Mississippi, as you brought up, that was your example. Mississippi has been 50th in education since the beginning when the Department of Education was instituted, and it still is. So if the government was efficient, if the Department of Education was really helping people, if it was really justifying its necessity to be dumping all of this money into it, then why can they not help Mississippi? Why haven't they yet? And all of a sudden we're going to believe this is the year that they're going to do it if we just give them some more money. They had 45 years, but they didn't do it. But this time, I think they really will.
Is there also not just finally on this one, guys? So I want to get one more topic in before we say goodbye. Mm-hmm. But Taryn, has there not been a huge issue when it comes to illegal immigration in America and the industry, the perceived industry, working behind the scenes that has allowed people who've broken into America essentially to have housing, lower mortgage payments, whether it's any kind of benefit really, at the expense of pretty much everybody else? Is that not something that could be classed as deep state, really, allowing that kind of thing to happen?
So it's interesting because to classify it as deep state, I think is probably hard because I do think it varies state by state and who's impacted the most. I don't think that every state provides the same kinds of services to illegal immigrants that everyone else does. This is something where there is states and cities that vary in what they do for each folks. So I don't think there's like an overwhelming, and I do think that we have really not addressed this properly. So thereby, if there was a deep state concerspiracy here, I think we would be doing maybe a better job.
Is what I'm getting at. Yeah, I suppose it's the ideological push is what I'm getting at, Kareem, which is this general perception really that over the course of, and we've had very similar issues here, don't get me wrong, but where you've got this big influx of people, there doesn't appear to be the capacity or the will from people pulling the strings of security services to actually stop that influx of people. You then simultaneously have the media and other sectors as well, potentially demonising anyone who, as a racist, who wants to come out against this kind of stuff. I would argue that is a kind of umbrella thing there that's potentially going on, Corinne. I mean, do you think that could end under Trump? I mean, he's certainly saying that he wants to end it.
I certainly hope that he does. And I think there's a lot of energy behind the movement to do that. I think that's one of those things. It's like, where does the deep state end and this like media elite begin? And I think there is a collusion between those elitists in government who would like to invite a bunch of people who displace workers in middle America that really never affect, the most elite of New York City or Martha's Vineyard. Those elites really do have a relationship with the media to just downplay the problem that they've created. But I don't know if we have as much support within the government, which is a good thing, because our Border Patrol does want to secure the border. And that is something that's better. Sometimes we see the FBI not really wanting to go after the right bad guys, but we do have an agency that is ready to secure the border if they are given the right funds and the right orders. And we need a strong executive to do that, which I think Donald Trump will be. So there's hopefully some chance for movement there.
All right, both of you, thank you very much. We could obviously carry this on for like another hour, but much appreciated. And I do hope to talk to you again very, very soon. And good luck with everything that you're both going to be doing, in the coming weeks and months as well. As Taryn Rosencrantz there, Democratic strategist, founder and CEO of New Blue Interactive, and GOP strategist and founder at freepressfail.com, Corinne Clark. Thank you so much, both of you, and I hope to see you again very soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.